Close your eyes for just a moment. Breathe in. Can you smell it? That's pine trees and campfire smoke and cool night air all mixed together into something that doesn't have a name but feels like home. Now open your eyes, because tonight we're going somewhere special, past the city lights and the busy streets and the noise of everyday life, deep into the forest where the trees grow so tall they seem to hold up the sky. And somewhere in those woods, right now, 4 kids are sitting around a campfire. Their tent is pitched, their sleeping bags are waiting, their hot chocolate is cooling in tin mugs, and they have absolutely no idea that tonight is going to be the most magical night of their entire lives. My name isn't important. What's important is the story. And this story starts at a lake called Mirror Hollow. It was the last Friday of summer, the kind of day where the air is still warm but carries a little whisper inside it, a whisper that says autumn is coming, so you'd better make this count. 4 kids hiked the trail to Mirror Hollow Lake just as the sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains. The first was Maya, 10 years old, backpack perfectly packed, map folded in her front pocket even though she had the route memorized. Maya was the kind of person who made a plan and then made a backup plan and then made a backup plan for the backup plan. She walked at the front of the group because that's simply where Maya belonged. Behind her came Finn, 9 years old, backpack slightly lopsided, one shoelace already coming undone. Finn was not a hiker. Finn was a boy who liked sofas and snacks and television. But Finn loved his friends more than he loved comfort. So here he was, sweaty, a little out of breath, and secretly having the time of his life, even though he would never admit it out loud. Then there was Zoe, also 10, with a pair of binoculars around her neck and a pocket field guide to woodland birds tucked under her arm. Zoe noticed everything: the way the moss grew thicker on the north side of a tree, the tiny mushrooms clustered at the base of an old oak, the hawk circling lazily overhead. Zoe walked through the forest like she was reading a book she already loved, finding favorite passages everywhere she looked. And last came Oscar. 8 years old, quiet, careful, always just slightly behind the others, not because he was slow, but because he was watching. Oscar carried a brown leather journal that was almost completely full of drawings: trees, clouds, beetles, faces. If Oscar saw something, he drew it. That was just how Oscar made sense of the world. These 4 had been friends since before they could remember. And this camping trip, just the 4 of them, one tent, one fire, one lake, had been planned for the entire summer. Maya stopped at the top of a small ridge and pointed down into the valley below. The lake sat there like a secret. Mirror Hollow, long and still and perfectly, impossibly calm. The pine trees lined its edges like they were standing guard, and the sky above it had turned the color of a peach with long golden ribbons of cloud stretched across it. Nobody said anything for a moment, because some things are too beautiful for words, and these 4 kids knew that. Then Finn said he was absolutely starving and could they please set up camp immediately. They found their campsite right where the map promised it would be. A flat clearing between 2 ancient oak trees, 10 steps from the water's edge. Maya assigned jobs the way Maya always did, calmly, clearly, with no room for argument. Finn was on firewood. Zoe was on tent setup. Oscar was supposed to be on tent setup too, but he'd sat down on a log and started drawing the lake. So Zoe set up the tent herself and didn't really mind. By the time the sun fully disappeared, the fire was crackling, the tent was standing, and 4 tin mugs of hot chocolate were balanced carefully on a flat rock near the flames. Finn had found the perfect log to sit on, one that was exactly the right height and had a comfortable lean to it. He declared it the best seat in the forest. Oscar drew it. Zoe identified the type of tree it had come from: a fallen white birch. She said probably 20 years old at least. Maya wrote the campsite details in her notebook, and then they just sat, which is one of the things camping does to you if you let it. It slows you down. It takes away all the rushing and the buzzing and the checking and the scrolling, and it leaves you with just this: a fire, some friends, a sky filling slowly with stars, and a hot mug warming your hands. Oscar looked up from his journal and stared at the water. Mirror Hollow Lake was earning its name. The surface was so still, so perfectly calm, that the reflection of the sky above it looked exactly like the sky itself, stars beginning to appear, the last pale glow of sunset on the horizon, clouds drifting. It was like there were two skies, one above, one below. Oscar turned to a fresh page in his journal and began to draw. It was Zoe who first said what they were all thinking. She said quietly, so as not to disturb the stillness, that she'd never seen a lake like this before. Maya agreed. She'd been to 14 different campsites over the past 3 summers, and she'd never seen water so still. Finn said it was a little bit spooky, but in a good way, and Oscar said nothing. He just kept drawing, but he nodded slowly, which meant he felt it too. There was something about this lake, something that none of them could quite name yet. It happened at exactly 9:30. Oscar saw it first because Oscar always saw things first, even though he was the quietest. He stopped drawing, he lowered his journal very slowly, and he pointed at the lake without saying a single word. The others followed his finger, and then they saw it too. The stars in the lake were moving, not the way a reflection moves when water ripples. This was different. The lights beneath the surface were drifting, slowly, gently, like they were alive. Little points of silver blue light, wandering through the dark water as if they were exploring. The stars, it looked like, had fallen into the lake and were swimming. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The fire crackled. An owl called once from somewhere deep in the pines. The 4 friends sat completely still and watched the lights move through the water below them. Then Finn whispered, and his voice had lost all of its usual silliness, replaced with pure and genuine wonder. He whispered that he thought the lake was magic. Zoe stood up very carefully and walked to the water's edge. She crouched down and looked close. She pulled out her small torch and angled it at the surface, and then she smiled. The kind of smile that means, "You've just solved something beautiful." She told them it wasn't magic, or she corrected herself. It was the best kind of magic. The real kind. The kind that science can explain and still takes your breath away. What they were looking at, she said, were tiny living creatures, microscopic almost, called bioluminescent plankton. Some lakes have them, especially old, deep, undisturbed lakes like this one. They produce their own light, the same way fireflies do, when the water is perfectly still and the night is very dark and the conditions are just right. They glow, and because Mirror Hollow was so impossibly calm, the real stars above and the glowing creatures below had blended together into one single, seamless picture. Sky and lake become one, light above, light below. Finn sat forward and stared. He asked very quietly if the tiny creatures knew they were beautiful. Nobody laughed. Because it was a good question, it was actually a wonderful question, the kind that sounds simple and goes very, very deep. Zoe thought about it. Then she said she didn't think they knew. She said they just glowed because that was what they were built to do. That was their nature. They made light the same way a tree makes leaves or a bird makes a song, without thinking about it, without trying, just because that was who they were. Oscar wrote that down in his journal, not a drawing this time, just the words, in his small, careful handwriting, right beneath his sketch of the lake. They glow because that is what they are built to do. Maya stared at the water for a long time. Then she said that she thought that was the best reason to do anything. Not because someone told you to, not because you wanted people to notice, but because it was simply what you were made for. The fire crackled, the lights drifted. The 4 friends sat together at the edge of Mirror Hollow Lake and watched the tiny living stars move slowly through the dark water below them. They stayed by the water for a long time, longer than they planned. Long past when Maya had said they should be in their sleeping bags, but Maya was the one who said it was okay to stay. Just this once. They told each other things the way people do when it's late and dark and something beautiful has made them feel open. Finn told them that he'd been nervous about this camping trip, that he almost said he couldn't come, that sleeping outside scared him a little, if he was being honest, but that right now, in this moment, looking at this lake, he was so glad he came that he couldn't even find the words for it. Zoe told them that she wanted to be a naturalist when she grew up, someone who studies the natural world, not to control it or change it, just to understand it and help other people see how extraordinary it already is. She'd never said that out loud before to anyone. Oscar held up his journal. He showed them the drawing he'd been working on all evening, the lake, the reflection, the stars above and below blending into each other. It was the best drawing he'd ever done. They could all see that, and Oscar knew it too. He closed the journal carefully and held it against his chest. Maya said she had something to tell them as well. She said she spent so much time planning everything, every trip, every route, every detail, because plans made her feel safe. But that tonight, nothing went according to plan. They'd stayed up too late and wandered too close to the water and stumbled onto something none of her maps had mentioned. And it was the best thing that had ever happened on any camping trip she'd ever planned. Sometimes, she said, the best things are the ones you don't plan for. The fire had burned down to glowing embers by the time they finally made their way to the tent. They pulled off their boots and climbed into their sleeping bags and lay there in the dark with the tent flap open, listening to the forest settle into its nighttime rhythms. Crickets, a distant frog, the soft whisper of wind through the pines, and if you were very quiet and looked very carefully through the open tent flap at the lake beyond, you could still see it. The faint, soft glow, the tiny stars still drifting, still doing the only thing they knew how to do, shining. That night, all four of them had the same dream. They were floating, not falling, floating, suspended in something warm and dark and full of tiny lights in every direction, above them, below them, around them, like being inside the lake itself, like being one of the glowing things. And in the dream, none of them felt small. They felt like exactly what they were. Just right, just enough, exactly where they were supposed to be. When morning came and the sun turned the tent walls golden and the birds started their first songs in the pines, Maya was the first one awake. She looked out at the lake. In the daylight, it was just a lake again, still and silver and beautiful in an ordinary way. But she knew what it held, and she smiled, because some places keep their magic hidden until the moment is exactly right. And Mirror Hollow had shown them theirs. Sleep well tonight, and if you ever find yourself somewhere quiet and dark and still, look at the water. You never know what might be glowing underneath. Good night, adventurers. We'll be back at camp soon.